Welcome into the Backyard Brothers podcast. I'm struggling with something here. We have a lot of cool stuff going on this weekend, and the NCAA tournament has ended, but then a lot of stuff are starting up again. We've got the Masters starting. Well, it's technically continuing today, ends tomorrow. um, and we've got some.
It'll end on Sunday, so they're finishing up.
Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, finishing up the second round today because
Okay.
some crazy stuff happened with some strong storms coming through and knocking over a couple of trees near the 17th hole, and they had to suspend play and get that going. And so finishing up the second round today in pouring rain. So it's just
that's crazy.
If Augusta wasn't challenging enough, they gotta play in pouring rain right now this morning, and then and having to play most of the players having to play close to 30 holes today in order to get third round and finish the second round. So crazy stuff happening in Augusta, and it's neat to see Brooks Koepka, a live golfer, in the lead. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up winning, having a live golfer win the Masters.
That'd be fun.
Very cool.
Have either of you played golf in the rain?
I've played in
maybe a
sprinkling rain.
sprinkle.
I played in Hawaii where it rains every 10 minutes and then turns off and then turns back on. So, but I can't imagine playing in a downpour.
Yeah, not a downpour.
So, the other thing that we want to talk about before we move into the main portion of our show today is the NBA playoffs are really right around the corner. I think it's what is it, tomorrow or Sunday maybe, that's the last day of games of the season. I think most teams have one game left. Some teams have two. Some will play today and tomorrow, today and tomorrow. But the play-in tournament has been a thing now for what this is the fourth season of that, maybe third or fourth season of that.
I think so, yes.
And most of the play-in teams are set, although the Western Conference is quite a bit more ambiguous. I think the Eastern Conference, I think there's 5 teams that could be in 4 spots there. But Dustin, why don't you take us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, in the Eastern Conference, it's, just kind of teams jockeying for the last couple positions. It's at this point, pretty much everything is set in the East. Whereas in the West, seeds 1 through 4 are pretty much set. Whereas, the Sacramento and Memphis are jockeying between number 2 and 3. And then seeds 5 through 9, which is 2 playoff and 3 play-in. There's 5 teams that could end up in 5 different spots. And so if everybody wins, they're all playing different teams. If everybody wins, they end up where they are. But the NBA hasn't yet posted all the different scenarios because it's quite complex about, if somebody wins this and somebody loses that, where it's going to end up. And so it's exciting, and invite any sports fans to just see the drama unfold over the next day and a half.
Yeah. It's always exciting. This is one of the better times of the year for NBA playoffs, and just the excitement that ramp up for that. It's so much fun. Next week, a week from today, we'll be doing a full NBA playoff preview show because all the matchups will be set and it will start that day. The playoffs will start that day, I believe. And so we'll do a full show, kind of recap some of the play-in games, but mainly just looking forward to these matchups and some predictions and things like that. And that's our format. It's what's been our format. A couple of, maybe a month ago or so, I did one show, and then we had the NCAA tournament preview, and then we finished the next week with the second half of my show. And so our shows are kind of split between different things, and it's going to happen again today. Today is Cody's first half of his show. Next week, he'll get a break as we talk about the NBA playoffs, and then we'll pick it up again in 2 weeks for Cody's second half. So that's how this is happening. And so I believe we have some questions for Cody to go through. But before we just dive into those, Cody, why don't you first of all, I believe there's a new addition that we failed to mention in your family for the Backyard Brothers podcast. And then just take us through some of your interests and some of what you've told us as your primary area of interest in sports.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, first off, we welcomed our second child into our family little under 3 weeks ago now. And he so we have two boys under two now. So that's a fun household to be in. It's crazy and hectic, but it's a lot of fun. And he's a very chill and peaceful baby and sleeps more than our first child did when he was a newborn. So we're getting sleep. So that's the best part. Um, but yeah, we're super happy and we're excited to be growing our family. As far as my interest, and I can't say I'm an expert in any of this, so I'm not going to say that I am. Far from it, but I have a lot of interests in football. That's my main sport, my main thing, my main go-to. I love college football. I love NFL football. I love like statistics and attempting to analyze those statistics and NFL comparisons to college players and the draft. So pretty much anything around rotating around football, whether it's college or pro level, is something that I like to dig into and learn more about if I can, or attempt to argue something that may sound hopefully intelligible.
I was muted for a second. Great. Thanks for that. I think we have 4 questions today, 3 from me and 1 from Dustin. But I think some of them are a little bit themed. And so excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 1, and then we'll move on from there. But so Cody, let's talk about quarterbacks. We in mainly in the NFL, but we know that quarterback is the most important position in the NFL. It has been for years, maybe forever. But what are the next 2 or 3 most important positions in your mind, and why? And then the second part of that question is have have those ranks, have those positions importance changed as the game has evolved? For example, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe it was the running back, but is that as important today as it was back then? And what has taken its place if not? That's kind of the question that I have.
I like that question. Well, yeah. So first off, yeah, we all know and agree that the quarterback is definitely the most important position, as they're not only the captain of the offense, but really the captain of the team. Um, so I think that honestly, I would say the second most important position in my mind would be just anyone on the offensive line in general. And the reason why I say that is without your offensive line blocking and calling your scheme and all that, your quarterback is not going to have time to hand off the ball, let alone throw it. And so, and I was thinking, and as I'm thinking about it now, I can't say that the left tackle is more important than the center. Left tackle will block, for blindside blocks, but the center is the one who's, calling those schemes and hiking the ball and all of that. And so I think the offensive line is super important. But it has evolved over time. I think that nowadays you'll see them, they're a lot quicker with their feet. They're a lot faster nowadays. And I think that's probably because they're trying to keep up with more mobile quarterbacks nowadays. And so that's what I would say as for the second most important position. The third one might be a little unorthodox in my mind, but I would say the kicker is actually the third most important position on the team. And as I'm thinking about that right now, I would say that how many times, at least in recent memory, how many times would you say that you've seen a kicker win the game or send the game into overtime or even lose a game for a team? Or even score all the points for the entire team, the entire game. We've seen that happen for sure. And so I think that that the kicker is the third most important position. And when I look at this, the quarterback, we said the most important. We've seen Patrick Mahomes single-handedly win games, basically. Um, the offensive line helps, and protects them, and it makes it possible for them to go forward. But then also the kicker has single-handedly won games before too. And so as I'm thinking about this now, it's hard for me to choose any one specific position on the defense as one of those top three most important positions. It's important for me to say though that every position is important and has its spot, and the team won't work without them. But those three most important positions, I think, would be that quarterback and then the offensive line members, and then the kicker. I think that it's important to say that. And then with your with the game evolving, kickers, first thing I think of is Justin Tucker. And I'm this is all recent memory or current. I'm not pulling a whole lot from 50s, 60s, 70s, at least for this, but kickers definitely have the ability to kick a lot farther now than they used to. I think Justin Tucker has a record for 66 yards or something like that. And back in, early 2000s, 90s, 80s, there's no way they were kicking that far. And so I think that they definitely evolved because the teams have needed them to win the game for them when they're on the 40-yard line, 45-yard line, 50-yard line. Even they attempt to do that. And so I think that it's evolved that way for the kickers. So that's my stance on that. Do you guys have any follow-up questions on that?
My follow up with your offensive line, and I don't disagree with you, but if you're a coach or a GM, what would you choose? A fantastic offensive line or a fantastic defensive line to put pressure on the opposing quarterback if you had to choose one?
I think that's a very good question. If I had to choose one, I'd probably go defense. And the reason why is we hear that saying, defense wins championships. If we can stop the other team's most important player, then we can probably win the game. And so, although it's both are super important, and I'd be tempted to take the best offensive lineman. If the best defensive lineman is available, I want to have him, because, like I said, if we can disrupt their most important position, then we can probably win the game.
The one follow-up statement / question that I have, you had mentioned that there's not one specific position on the defense that you would want to single out just because they're so important. I'm wondering if the game has evolved to the point where the passing offense is so vital that cornerback is developing into such a huge important position on the field to be able to control, and maybe not just cornerback, but even slot cornerback. Like this position that really didn't exist until 5 years ago, and now is a starter on the defense. So they're usually bring three. They field three corners along with two safeties now. And they're taking from the linebackers. Usually, there's only two linebackers now in the field. So have linebackers really devolved, while defensive backs, specifically cornerbacks, evolved?
That's also a really good question. I don't know if I wouldn't say linebackers have devolved. No, I wouldn't say that. I do think the corners are evolving to being faster, taller, more agile, more quick on their feet. Is what I would say. But to say that the linebacking core may be devolving, I wouldn't agree with that, because I know that the middle linebacker is the captain of the defense. They call the shots. If I had to choose the most important position on defense, it'd probably be middle linebacker, just for that reason. But the linebacker can't do any, can't complete his position and everything without everyone else, when the quarterback can, in essence. And so I wouldn't say they devolved at all. They still have a really important game. I think just how they play has changed a little bit, and where their importance, lingers, whether they're rushing the quarterback more or stepping back into coverage.
Okay, great. Just because, Dustin, my next question kind of continues and kicks off of this. How about I give my next question, then you jump in with yours.
Yep.
Because it's also talking about the quarterbacks. I'm wondering, as we've talked about the game evolution, has the prototype for NFL quarterbacks changed as the game has evolved? It used to be, tall, strong pocket passers. You think of Peyton Manning, you think of Tom Brady, even these guys that are 6'4", 6'5", big, strong guys, strong arms, but they pretty much stand in mud. They stand back there in the pocket and they throw the ball. They're really good at it. But is that now outdated? And looking at the guys like Lamar Jackson, even Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, even sometimes these guys that have a lot more athleticism, is that required? And what does that mean for college and high school quarterback prospects as they realize how this game is evolving?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, yeah, let's look back at recent memory a little bit. So, and I'm only going to go back to 2000s kind of time frame, maybe 90s a little bit. But if when I look back at that and think about all the quarterbacks, and you mentioned a couple yourself, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, there's Brett Favre, Joe Flacco, kind of a little bit later in the 2000s, Jay Cutler, Carson Palmer, Ben Roethlisberger. You can find a lot of these, you described pocket passers. And then when you think about that same time frame, I'm trying to think about how many people were scramblers. I can think of maybe, Michael Vick, maybe Dante Culpepper, Donovan McNabb. And at least off the top of my head, that's all I can think of right away. Of course, I'm sure there's more than that. But when we look at just that back then, there was a lot more, stick in the mud, kind of like what you said, versus scrambling QBs. But today, in today's game currently, we have, Aaron Rodgers, it's kind of like that. Who else? Maybe Kirk Cousins a little bit, Matthew Stafford. They're not really scrambling, but we have Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray. Russ Wilson was a mobile quarterback. He's kind of slowed down a little bit now, but we can look at there's a lot more now. Justin Herbert even, who are that athleticism type scrambling QBs, and so I would definitely say that it has evolved to that. And even to the point where the QBs in today's game who aren't that Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray type are expected to run the ball more. And so I think of Josh Allen, you mentioned that too. He's really similar to Ben Roethlisberger in his height and build. But he can run the ball and truck people like Ben Roethlisberger couldn't. And so I think it's a lot more expected, to have, people, Joe Burrow and people running the ball more. And so I would say, yeah, athleticism is required. They're looking for that more. And what you're able to do with the ball. And I think that goes back to what I said before. These linemen have evolved to be quicker because the game's evolved to have these QBs running around and scrambling to make plays last. And so I think that what was I gonna say? With these QBs, I think that we're seeing this change. It has to come from somewhere, right? We're not just the NFL's not making these players. They're coming from college. They're coming from high school. And so I wonder if it's that just more kids are just more agile or whatever, or if high school coaches are just actually kind of coaching and training these kids to be this kind of way. And as they see the game change this way, they're continuing to find these kids like this. And so as the game evolves, we'll see more high school and college quarterbacks being like this rather than your stick in the mud kind of doing it, although that still works occasionally. I think that to be, successful and to be a good prospect, if you're a quarterback, you better learn how to scramble, run the ball. Did that answer your question? Was that your whole question?
Yeah. There's so many thoughts that I have. I'm trying to boil it down into one follow-up, but I'm wondering, so you had mentioned guys like Kyler Murray, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that body type, he's not even 6 feet tall. He's my height. He's 5'10". And that would never have been, and he was a first overall pick. But a few years ago, that would never have been the case. There's no way that they would have thought he could have survived in the NFL as a quarterback because he's so little. But I'm just kind of, I guess, wondering. Some players back in college at that time when the prototype was more bigger athletic builds. I think of Ronald Curry for North Carolina. He was a great quarterback in college. When he went to the NFL, he changed to wide receiver because that's what he had to do, and he's played wide receiver in the NFL for a few years. Charlie Ward won the Heisman Trophy for Florida State, but but his kind of his style, he was a little guy. He was 6'2". I mean, little uh, for a quarterback, and he decided rather than play the sport that he played in college and won the Heisman Trophy, was the best player in college football. He decided that he had a better chance playing in the NBA, and he played for the Knicks for 15 years. And so I'm kind of wondering, just as a follow-up, how much is that changing to make sure that these guys that want to play quarterback can now play quarterback in the NFL because the skill set now has evolved to meet their desires, meet their wants. Does that make any sense?
I think so. I'll try to answer that, and you let me know if I'm not answering your question, but or just giving my thoughts to that. I think that with the quarterback position changing to the way it is, where Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray kind of person can be who they are. I think, what am I trying to say here? That perhaps they're trying to get their skills or body in a way to be able to play every position, and then be able to, if you know what I mean, if they become agile and fast and have good hands and just quick feet, but they can also throw the ball really well, then they can, with good hope, expect to be able to play the quarterback position, even in the NFL, let alone college, because that's the game where the game's evolving. But I think they also know that, hey, if Joe Bob's better at throwing the ball for me, I can step into receiver and prove my coach that I can do that too, kind of thing. And so it's almost like maybe an insurance kind of idea that, hey, if I develop all these skill sets for myself, I know that I can play, let alone it might be running back, it might be the quarterback, it might be receiver. If I'm, Josh Allen, it might be tight end or defensive end, or whatever it is. And so I think that maybe that's the way kids are looking at it nowadays. And I think maybe a good way you should look at it, to ensure you play. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Dustin, any follow-ups?
Maybe a quick follow-up, and maybe it's slightly a question, slightly a statement, and I'm not sure we should be using Kyler Murray as an example for this, in my opinion, just because I don't know. In the last several seasons, the Cardinals have been surrounded, just completely stacked with offensive talent, and have made absolutely nothing out of it. And with the quarterback being the most important position, it relies on Kyler Murray to get that offense moving. And I don't think it's correlated to his body type. I think it's correlated to his decision making and the mental aspect. In my opinion, about Kyler Murray is that the Cardinals have had every opportunity to be the best team in the league and have failed. And unfortunately, as the quarterback that sits on your shoulders, as Cody, you mentioned, that's the most important thing. And so I look at the scramble quarterback as there hasn't really been one that has had a super long career. And if there are any, Cody, I'd love for you to mention some. I look at, Russell Wilson, there you go, Steve Young. Thank you. So there are a few. John Elway as well, I suppose. But so it'd be interesting that the scramble quarterback, what you're talking about, I see it as it's kind of flip a coin. 1 out of every 20 sticks, things like that. And wonder if you have any follow up to that statement, any follow up on that, Cody, if you agree or disagree.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I don't know if I really had considered that fully to what you're saying, but I think that's a good point. Looking at it, it's kind of, yeah, you flip a coin on it and say, okay, well, this guy's really fast. He can throw the ball. He looks good. His off platform throw looks good. Let's bring him in. And then that was Zach Wilson. That didn't work out, kind of thing. Whatever it was. And so yeah, it's kind of flipping the coin. But then you have people from back in the day like Michael Vick. What a career he had. But he could do that, and he succeeded. Lamar Jackson had a good few years. He's kind of struggling a little bit right now, but you make a good point. I would say that maybe it's more important to look at how, for what am I trying to say? Prospects, when you're analyzing prospects, more important to make sure that they know how to step up in the pocket and throw the ball, let alone know how to run around, because that's what you need from your quarterback, is being able to make good decisions and throw the ball. But it's a good point making. And I think, going back to this Kyler Murray example, Kyler Murray might want to consider moving to running back at this point, just to save his own career. That's my thought. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's going to be good and have a long life in the league. But the way he can run and stuff, he can play running back, and maybe they should find someone else to play quarterback who's a little bit taller and stuff, and better throwing the ball. But that's my thought. I think you made a good point though.
Okay, following up with my question, and it does pair with this discussion a little bit, which is with players that don't have the prototypical body type, that you think of we've talked about quarterbacks, how they're supposed to be. You also think about receivers, who are usually also tall and fast and lanky. But of any players that have not followed that prototypical body type for their position, who are some of the greats? Who broke the mold of what a player is supposed to look like, and was incredibly great despite their size, I suppose?
That's a really good question. And I know you guys know a lot about football too. So if I miss any that maybe were the first break mold kind of person, you let me know. But as I'm thinking about this firsthand right away, I look at the running back position first. There's a couple of people I want to mention here. On the small end, I remember Darren Sproles being really, really good and really, really amazing. And he was, I think, 5'6", maybe 5'7". I don't know. Maybe I don't know if he was more than 5'7" or 5'8". But in today's game, you don't see a running back smaller than 5'10", I think, not usually at least. And so Darren Sproles was really small, but because of that, he was able to just get through the holes, and defensive linemen can't even see where he is because he's so small and hiding between everyone, and super quick feet, agile, fast, very fast. And as I'm thinking about him, I look at today's NFL draft, and I see a lot in that in Deuce Vaughn. That he's a very similar Darren Sproles type, but that's future looking into it. But I think of Darren Sproles in that way. I remember him being really good, staying in the same position and going to a size bigger. Everyone knows who Jim Brown is. Jim Brown is the best college player of all time, and then one of the best running backs of all time in NFL, if not the best running back. And he was 6'2", 231 pounds. And as a running back, especially back in that day, that's a big guy running around, but he can just truck over people. He's fast. He was also quick feet. And I think for that type of body type, for running back, he's the one who broke the mold for that. And so a lot of people look for a running back if they want to look at the whole, bruise and break and just demolition type running back. You can look at kind of Jim Brown type running backs, and I think Derrick Henry is a good example of that in today's game. He's I think 6'2" and around the same build and weight as well. And then I think of, and this is also kind of more recent memory too, but in quarterback position, Ben Roethlisberger is going to be a Hall of Famer. and he did not have a normal quarterback body. He was 6'5", 240 something pounds. We talked about him earlier too. He was a pocket passer, stick in the mud kind of guy, and that's because he was that big. But I don't, and I wonder if there was any, I don't know. I would need to do more research on that. But if there was any quarterbacks like that before him who had that kind of ability that he had, and I know that in today's game there's Josh Allen, and we already talked about him. He's following in that mold and doing that with that kind of body type, but excelling and going to the way he's going. He's gonna be a Hall of Famer too. Um, those are the first few people I think of. When you first say that question, my thought went to Kyler Murray, and I was like, well, he's not succeeding in much, but he's a short quarterback. Those are the first few people I could think of right away, at least in those positions, who really defy that kind of expectation and body type. But I would be curious, if you guys thought of someone, immediately right away as I'm answering this question, I'd be curious if who else I might be missing too. But I think it's, going off your question, I think it's important to know that just because someone may not have the typical body type for that position, that they may excel and succeed and be a great at that. I think it's important for prospects and coaches and GMs to know looking at the draft.
I'll throw out some names, just names. I won't do a whole lot of, but quarterback position, Drew Brees. As someone that is short enough to break that mold. Running back, you talked about Jim Brown. How about Derrick Henry in today's game? How huge he is to be so much bigger than all of that. I think on the defensive side, linebacker London Fletcher. This is reaching back into the 90s and early 2000s. He was 5'9" and played middle linebacker, and was one of the best players at middle linebacker for years and years and years. And then at cornerback, Richard Sherman, because he's 6'4", broke that mold and succeeded. So Dustin,
that's true.
Yeah, a few names also, like all that. Jerome Bettis. I don't know if he ever worked out, but he's one that broke the mold there. I also think of Aaron Donald on the defensive line. He's small. He's tiny. He is not your defensive tackle, and he's one of the best to ever do it. Richard Sherman was one that I had in my mind, and I'd also add Cam Chancellor. He was huge too. He was 6'3", 6'4". As a safety, he broke the mold as a defensive back as well. So yeah, it is interesting to see players who don't fit their size and do great regardless.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see if we have time to do this or not. I'm going to put it out the question, and if we need to finish it next week, we'll finish it next week. But the last question for the week is a different subject altogether. Are football head coaches given enough time on average to make an impact on their teams and turn them around? It seems a really a quick carousel sometimes. And so is there a real equation that GMs and teams can take to find the right coach, or is it just as much as a coin flip as a draft pick is to find the right coach to fit that team?
Well, I definitely do think it's a coin flip. That's for sure. When you're at least hiring a first time head coach, you have their coaching experience to look at. But in my mind, honestly, I think that that they are given enough time. And usually, the reason why I say that is the average tenure for a head coach is about 3 years in the NFL. When I look at that, let's say they're hired the first year and they have that 1 year to kind of inject their culture, their philosophy, their idea of what they want to do. The second year, they have they've been able to start developing their new draft picks, re-signing or signing free agents, and kind of getting their team set. And that third year is when they need to break out. Because of that, they've had those 2 years to set their mold in that sense. I think coaches who are fired before 3 years, I don't think they had enough time. And with some exceptions, I think Nathaniel Hackett probably deserved to go. But I think that typically, I think they're given the time they need. And an example I want to throw out just right away is Dan Campbell for the Lions. He is actually about to enter his third year coaching. He was hired in 2021. I think it was 2021, January. And looking at his first year, they did terrible, right? He took the Lions, they won, or they lost their first 8 games, tied the next one, and then lost the next 2 or 3. Had a total of 3 wins. But I know I saw a lot of videos about his whole philosophy. We're going to break some teeth. We're going to break some bones. We're going to, break kneecaps. He's wanted to break people, I guess. But, and that kind of philosophy. And then year 2, he did, he was able to do some drafting, free agent signings. Year 2, they had a chance literally to go in the playoffs and didn't go to it just because the Seahawks had won their game. And so, and then Green Bay had lost theirs. And so I'm expecting a lot from his 3rd year from Dan Campbell. I'm expecting a lot. I'm expecting a playoff appearance, And so I think that they're given enough time, as long as it's 3 years, so because of that kind of layout, and have a year to do the culture philosophy, year 2 to develop those players they've gotten, and year 3 is their breakout year.
Just a quick follow-up at all?
No follow-ups for me.
Okay. I think it varies on the situation, but sometimes 3 years is plenty. Sometimes I don't think it's quite enough, and so it kind of varies on the coach and the team and the culture and where they were when they hired the coach. But I liked your answer, Cody. So remember, next week we're gonna be talking NBA playoffs, and then we'll pick up with the remaining questions the week after for Cody. So with that, thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.